Hello guys, I'm Kunal Shrivastav. Today I'll be talking about the Apollo space program. Next slide. Okay, so a little background on this subject is the USA and Russia were heavily competing to get a man to the moon, and actually the first crewed spacecraft that went to space was called Vostok #1, and it carried wait, that should say astronaut. I don't know why it says
Russian astronauts. Soviet astronauts were called.
Okay, yeah, whatever. It's carried Yuri Gagarin into space in 1961. They did a full orbit around the Earth, and 5 other crewed missions also occurred in that same spacecraft. And President John F. Kennedy of the United States set a goal for astronauts to land on the moon, from American astronauts on the moon by the end of the 60s. So and Soviets actually were already developing a massive rocket to reach the moon. I forgot the name, but I know they're developing one. And here is a quote that JFK said, I think in an address to Congress. He said, quote, "I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth." Next slide. Okay, so how does the Apollo spacecraft work? Here you can see, actually, I think this is Apollo 11 launching on July 16th, 1969. Basically, the rocket that gets the astronauts into space and into orbit is called the Saturn V rocket, and it had 3 stages in it. The first stage, it was shut off. It was launched at Cape Canaveral, Florida, and mission control was located in Houston, Texas. Now, the first stage, it was launched in Cape Canaveral. It shut off the first stage about 42 miles above the Earth's surface to get the astronauts into space, I think, out of the Earth's atmosphere. Basically, the Earth's atmosphere has gravity pulling you to the ground, but basically there's an escape velocity necessary to escape the Earth's atmosphere. And you can look that up. I forgot the exact number, but it's there. The second stage shut off once the spacecraft is in parking orbit, so it's just basically rotating around. After about 2 or 3 loops, the third stage gets fired up, and it's called the translunar injection, which sends the astronauts away from Earth and to the moon. Let me move this side. And then there's another important, difficult part that they do a lot of simulations in, called docking, in which the lunar module adapters, they detach from the remaining stage, and the command module and service module do a turnaround. The command module is called the CSM. It's where the astronauts spend most of their time. It's also used for re-entry. And the service module has for fuel cells and oxygen tanks, and they turn around and they pull out the lunar module out of it's also called the LEM, which is the module that's used to land on the moon. It's designed for 2 people, which usually there's a command module pilot and then a lunar module pilot and a backup lunar module pilot or something. So only 1 person would only 2 people would get to land on the moon. The command module pilot would still be orbiting the moon, waiting for them to return back. So that's what happens. So once you dock, that's the most difficult part of the mission. Now you're just headed to the moon, which you usually launch. The moon is orbiting the Earth, so when you're launching, you're going to intersect the Earth. That's what intersect with the moon. You have to calculate that exact time, and then you don't want to let the spacecraft burn in space because the temperatures are a lot more extreme. So you do a barbecue roll, or you turn around a little bit here and there with the spacecraft. And returning home after the lunar stage is over, they reunite back with the CSM, and the LEM is just left behind. There are 2 stages. The first stage is left on the moon, and the other stage is it's left into lunar orbit. Once in Earth's orbit, the service module is detached, and the command module re-enters the Earth's atmosphere. It's the only part that actually returns safely to Earth. And parachutes are deployed to slow the module down as it splashes into the ocean, where carriers and helicopters take the astronauts to land. All right, next slide. All right, so here's a little diagram of the spacecraft that actually is going to the moon after the docking. So here we have the service module. You can see it's protecting this heat shield here and the command module because that's what's going to be used for re-entry. When you re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, there's a lot of friction generated, so that causes a lot of heat, as you know. Friction causes heat, so you don't want that. You don't want the astronauts to burn up and die. So that's what they have, a heat shield that's protected by that service module. And here, of course, you have a LEM ladder. As you know, Neil Armstrong climbed down. He said, "I'm at the foot of the ladder now." So that's basically where they climb down. This is the little window. They climb down it, and they go back to the. They go onto the moon. And there are other parts here, but some other parts that are important include probably this lunar module ascent stage. That's the part that it detaches from this spider-like thing, and it reunites with that one lonely astronaut in the lunar orbit who's a command module pilot. Those two astronauts leave that spider thing behind. It's called the lunar module descent stage. They go back and meet with the person in the lunar orbit. All right, next slide. All right, so Apollo missions began. Yay! NASA launched the Apollo space program, which was intended to land the first humans on the moon. It was the third United States human space flight program. They originally had a successful Earth mission in orbit of Earth mission in Project Mercury, which was launched in 1959 under Eisenhower when he was president. And Alan B. Shepard actually was the first American in space during the Mercury mission. Of course, Russians actually beat the Americans to space. So this is just the first American. He's not the first person in space. But Ed White also was beaten by the Russians to walk in space, but he was still the first American in space to walk in space. The first Apollo mission was actually a disaster because the three astronauts, including Ed White, they died in a fire in a command module that started in the command module, and they couldn't get the hatch to open up. Happened in 1967. So they decided, okay, we need to take precautions and be patient and do more missions and test out things. Next slide. I think you got it. No, you got it. Okay. So in Apollo 8, the astronauts were Jim Lovell. So of course they had a few Apollo missions preceding that to solve those problems. Then they wanted to go to the moon, and they weren't quite ready yet to land on it, but they wanted to see if they could reach it. So these three astronauts, Jim Lovell, Frank Borman, William Anders, they were sent on a mission, and they actually managed to orbit the moon 10 times and return safely to Earth, and gives the people at home necessary information and preparation to actually land humans on the moon for future missions. You can see President Johnson there actually watching on his television, and also you can see a picture of the Earth from the astronauts. All right, here's a quick flight path of Apollo 8. I think this is where I can't see where they take off, but here's where they're in orbit, and then of course it fires. They fire, and then there's a translunar injection, and then they get slingshotted back with the moon's gravity. It's called the trans-Earth injection.
Now, how long did these missions take?
Usually, it took 4 days to reach to the moon, and 4 days to come back, so 8 days. All right, now here's Apollo 11. Apparently, I know how many of you guys know what Apollo 11 is.
Yeah.
Okay, so of course it's the first successful moon landing mission. The astronauts were Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Pete Conrad. Pete Conrad was the command module pilot, so he didn't actually get to walk on the moon. These two did. As you can see, the duration was 8 days. First mission in which humans landed on the moon, Neil Armstrong and then Aldrin. And almost 670 million people around the world were watching. And famous quotes were from Armstrong that the eagle has landed, and I meant to put quotes on the second one, but one other famous one is that's one small step for man and one giant leap for mankind. And actually many people also doubted whether they actually made it to the moon, because as you can see in this picture, you might wonder, how is that flag waving? It shouldn't be waving because the moon has no air, but later on it was revealed that NASA had they put a little pole on the top of the flag, and the astronauts were struggling to get the flag out because it had a little error. So they thought that so they had to like manually wiggle the flag, and their human force caused that waving. So they got a few rock samples, and here's one of Riff. This is Buzz Aldrin right here. You can't actually see him, but this is Neil Armstrong right here. And those are all astronauts. Okay, next slide. So obviously that was a massive success, and they sent Pete Conrad and another. Two other people walked on the moon after that in Apollo 12. Pete Conrad is the one I know. I forgot the other guys, but so after 2 successful missions, the hype was really down now because the competition with Russia was kind of over, and there was less excitement. So for the Apollo 13 mission, they were going to Fromoro Highlands in the on a different part of the moon, but it got more dramatic because actually you can see here the astronauts. There's Jim Lovell, Jack Swigert, and Fred Hayes. Ken Mattingly was actually set to be the command module pilot, but it said he was exposed to the measles, and he was going to get ill when the 2 astronauts came back from the moon to rendezvous with him. So he was replaced by Jack Swigert a few days before the mission, I think 3 or 2 days before. And basically these 3 astronauts had an explosion on their way to the moon, I think on day 3. And basically the emergency ruled out any chance of landing on the moon, and actually endangers their own lives because they're losing oxygen and power as well to get home. So they had to ditch the moon landing and use a free return trajectory to try and use the LEM as a lifeboat for 3 people. Even though it was only built for 2, they had to filter out CO2 by making a CO2 filter, and they had to problem solve other things. The astronauts survived though, and that strengthened the image of the American space mission. And actually a movie about this incident was produced in 1995, which starred Tom Hanks and I believe a couple of other people. I think Bill Paxton and Gary Sines. Alright, next slide. Alright, and conclusion was basically in the end NASA landed 12 people on the moon, 12 Americans, and actually I think the Chinese did send people to the moon last year in 2020 December, but that's a long time after America. But in the end they landed 12 people with only 1 mission being unsuccessful, which is Apollo 13. The space race between Russia and the USA was all but settled for the time being, and Russia's rocket that was intended to go to the moon, actually it failed. And the last mission for Apollo was the 17th, around 1973, and later missions actually were canceled due to budget cuts. And at the time, the Apollo missions costed $20.6 billion, but if you adjust it for inflation, it cost $204 billion. And mankind might actually return to the moon by 2024. I think NASA said they intend, by then. And actually, people have wondered if you can actually go to Mars now. Tesla CEO Elon Musk is trying to develop technology to be at Mars by 2026. Okay, that's a picture of NASA. Of course, you all know what that is. All right, here are my sources.